My name's Emma and I'm doing a Masters in Children's Literature at the University of Cambridge, and I want to share a half-formed theory I have about make-believe play. So games of Let's Pretend permit children to imaginatively take on other roles and experiment with different behaviours without the threat of real-world consequences. So for example, a child can take on the role of evil space witch and scream obscenities at their friend who's in the role of benevolent alien, without having to worry about damaging the friendship in real life. And through this kind of imaginative experimentation, those two children can grow their knowledge of social interaction and social understandings. And actually, if you've ever observed a game of make-believe play, you probably will have seen moments where one child pushes the game right up to the boundary between real and pretend. And that's normally the point where the benevolent alien says, "Hey, I'm not playing anymore," which is the space witch's cue to not press any further. It's basically telling the space witch that if you continue, your actions will have real world repercussions. But there comes an age when make-believe play is no longer okay. Behaviour that is acceptable and even endearing in a 6-year-old can be pretty disturbing in a 30-year-old. When exhibited by adults, the outward signs of make-believe play, such as talking to oneself, miming an activity, or pretending that a mop is a horse, are all indicators of mental derangement. In essence, nobody wants to sit next to the 30-year-old space witch on the tube. As adults, we want to move away from the kind of identity flexing that's associated with make-believe play and towards a stable identity, or at least giving the world an impression of a steady, cohesive self. Rather than having a slippery, fragmented, transient self, we aspire to a consistent self. Or to put it another way, we want to grow up to be one person and not many people. And I suppose another obvious reason why make-believe play is prohibited in adulthood is because as adults, we are both blessed and cursed with always being taken seriously. So we have to be weaned off of make-believe play, and my theory is that novels offer children an alternative channel for their imaginative explorations. So children's literature can satisfy a child's desire to try on new identities and safely explore unfamiliar situations, at the same time as teaching her that this kind of imaginative experimentation and exploration needs to be a private, inward, sedentary activity that doesn't have material consequences. I don't think it's a coincidence that the age at which children are made to feel that make-believe play is no longer okay is also the age at which they're given longer novels, smaller font, fewer pictures, etc., etc. Parents and carers benefit from the transition from make-believe play to reading in an obvious way, in that reading is a lot less dynamic, a lot less noisy and a lot less messy than make-believe play. But I also think that children have something to gain from the transition too, and that is by relocating play from the outside world to one's mindscape, from the external to the internal. What the child gains is privacy. The mindscape is an unsupervised play space, or rather it's supervised by the author, who can take on the role of authoritative guardian, but can equally take on the role of the best playmate, the playmate that has the most amazing ideas for Let's Pretend games. Because really, that is the unspoken invitation at the start of every book. When we open that first page, that phrase, "Once upon a time," is a reformulation of the phrase, "Let's pretend." There is, of course, that amazing phase right before the child completes the transition from make-believe play to reading, which is when children love and appreciate the stories that they're reading, hearing, watching, but they're still engaging in make-believe play. And what they do is they take elements of the stories they've been exposed to and introduce them to their games. And you'll notice that their games become more narrative at this stage, because they have an elementary understanding of story structure. You might observe that their games kind of have exposition, climax, resolution. You'll see protagonists and antagonists, and there'll be that one child who reluctantly takes on the role of villain, even though they would quite like to be the hero in the game, but they do it because they know that without the villain there is no story, and therefore there is no game. Some researchers have called this relationship between reading and playing interanimation, and a classic example of this is a researcher who observes her young son being read the story of Peter Rabbit and then immediately demanding to get down from the chair and go outside to the garden so he can continue exploring the story of Peter Rabbit in his own flower beds. To my mind, this is, in essence, an instance where suspension of disbelief is not bounded by the edge of the book, but rather spills out into the child's surroundings. It's not that the child really believes that they're going to find Peter Rabbit outside, but that the child is participating in this expansive, multimodal, multi-platform game within which the book is just one corner, one element that may kick off the game, maybe the catalyst for the game, but is not the whole game. But in time, the book does become the whole game. So when thought about like this, when thinking about reading as an evolution of playing, one could argue that we never really leave behind make-believe play, but in adulthood, instead of animating dolls, we ventriloquize fictional characters in our minds. Instead of careering around Tesco pretending to be a cowboy, we read action thrillers. Instead of playing mums and dads, we read Mills and Boon. Instead of playing doctors, we watch House. So an interesting way to appraise a children's text might be to analyse the extent to which it satisfies the child's need and desire for imaginative play. You can ask questions like, does the text allow the child to imaginatively take on another role? And is that a challenging role? Does that role stretch the child? Equally, you can say, does the text allow the child to explore unfamiliar scenarios and unfamiliar situations and emotions? You can ask the question, is the text bossy? Does it dominate and control the imaginative play? Or does it let the child contribute imaginatively too, as a kind of co-creator or collaborator? In essence, you can ask, is the text a good playmate?